So it is very gratifying to see this diverse group of contributors of very different backgrounds and their takes on coexistence. NAHR aims to begin and continue these conversations through future events and the residencies in Italy and Southern California. And being embedded in these environments gives an inside-out perspective of coexistence and interdependence between species. It is now my pleasure to introduce Lucinda Coleman, who is in Australia and will moderate the next session, Phenomenology of Place. Lucinda is a dancer and choreographer based in Perth. She is adjunct lecturer at the Western Australian Academy of Performing Arts. She's a NAHR fellow and ambassador. Welcome, Lucinda. You are muted, Lucinda, sorry.
Thank you, Jose. And welcome to all of you who are joining the Nature Art Habitat webinar, Coexistence, Interdependence Between Species. You are now joining us for session 4, as Jose mentioned, Phenomenology of Place. So we'll be joined shortly by 3 extraordinary speakers who are currently living in Australia, and the panel will be conducted slightly differently in a round table format. In the spirit of reconciliation, Nature Art and Habitat acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. I'm going to begin by introducing you to the 3 speakers for our session 4 panel. Now, we do have a woman of Italian descent, Dr. Monica Gagliano, who's now living and working in Australia, as well as Dalisa Pigram, who is speaking to us from Darwin, which is the homeland of the Larrakia people. And then shortly, hopefully, Walley will be joining us from Whudjuk, which is also known as Perth, Australia. So Monica Gagliano is a research associate in evolutionary ecology at Southern Cross University in Australia. And her main research areas broadly focus on key aspects of ecological processes by which organisms are able to gather information on various conditions surrounding their environment in order to thrive. Monica's research aims at expanding our perception of animals and plants and more broadly of nature. And in the process of learning how to do this, she has pioneered the brand new research field of plant bioacoustics and extended the concept of cognition to plants, reigniting the discourse on plant subjectivity and ethical standing. So Monica will be joined by Dalisa Pigram, who is a Yawuru Bardi woman born and raised in Broome, which is in northwestern Australia. She's a co-artistic director and dancer and choreographer with the Marrugeku company. And in her community, Dalisa teaches the Yawuru language program at Cable Beach Primary School and is committed to the maintenance of Yawuru language and culture through arts and education. Dalisa is also co-editor of Marrugeku, and she's going to correct my pronunciation, I'm sure, which is subtitled Telling That Story, 25 Years of Trans-Indigenous and Intercultural Exchange. Walley is a very proud local Aboriginal woman who is a descendant of Nyoongar, including Whudjuk, Ballardong, Yuet and Binjarrab, and Yamaijti, Wajarri. Kay has a passion for uncovering history and using this to build relationships through sharing to people so they can heal through story sharing. She's actively involved in preserving local cultural areas considered sacred and in seeking ways to find solutions for areas of cultural significance. As mentioned, my name is Lucinda Coleman. I'm an adjunct lecturer at Western Australian Academy of Performing Arts, and it's my privilege and pleasure to be the moderator for today's panel. Welcome, Dalisa and Monica and Kay. Good morning. In Australia, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you both?
Well, thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's absolute pleasure. I'm not sure that Kay has come online, so we'll begin. You'll see that the sun is coming up where I am, so you can watch it rise on my face. But in some of you in the Northern Hemisphere, no doubt it's going down, and you should have a cocktail in hand while we wake up for our coffee, which speaks, I think, to place, doesn't it? That we all come from different locations on the globe in different ways, sunlit or, you know, in darkness. And I think there's something really extraordinary about being able to have a conversation about our location and the senses and the way we engage, and more broadly, how that speaks to coexistence. So I'm going to begin by asking a question, which is to both of you, and how would you define or explain that notion of coexistence, which has been discussed all day in the Northern Hemisphere, all night down south? So how would you yourself describe coexistence in the context of your profession and also your personal point of view? Monica, maybe perhaps we can start with you. I see you have a great background there.
Okay.
Welcome.
Well, first of all, I usually live on Binjarrab country, which is the Northern River region of New South Wales. But today I'm actually calling or joining from Whudjuk, Nyoongar, so I'm visiting Perth area, and of course I pay respect to both countries because they both host me and support me and feed me and love me. And but talking of place, I need to also acknowledge another country, which is my birth country. I do not consider myself so much Italian anymore because I was just born and grew up there for 18 years, after which Australia really has been my home. And so, but I feel like I need to acknowledge that country as well. And I was born in the northern part of Italy on the western north side. And those mountains have made my bones and my body for 18 years. So I acknowledge that place too. And now I forgot the question.
Well, our workshop is about coexistence. And
that's right.
Yeah, and so maybe as a way to start, before we get into the notion of existing with others together and being in place and responsive in terms of phenomenology of place and senses, how do you define it? How in your professional experience and personally, or from your point of view, what does coexistence mean for you?
Oh, so I've already answered the question then. Because coexistence to me is not an option. It's not something that you can engage with or choose not to. Either you're aware of it or not, but you are coexisting no matter what. When we acknowledge country, for me, when we acknowledge the space where we are in, which means not just the land, but also all the others that are living with us, for me, it means that you are just bringing your awareness to the fact that you are in this web of interrelationships, and therefore you are consciously acknowledging and connecting with this space of coexistence. And I do that both at the personal level, of course, but in my work in particular, because I guess my work has become, to me, a way to express this sense of coexistence, and hopefully, if anything, it inspires others to remember that as well.
Yes, yes. You're speaking with such respect and almost intuitively, as though it's an embodied awareness of how we're interrelated and interconnected with each other, with the land. Can you speak to that as a scientist as well?
Yeah, as I said, I do this in my work, and for my work, I was trained as a marine scientist to start with, and I had to go through my own little, I guess, an initiation by country itself, and it changed everything about how I relate to it, in the sense that some of the activities that I was doing as in the name of my science, as part of my work, became impossible to continue. And I'm referring to like the using of others, in my case was fish, as if they were objects with no interest, no agenda of their own, no stories to tell. And but I had a really powerful experience in the field where my fish themselves showed me that how wrong I was. And that experience, it was so embodied and so deep that it just changed me. And so I then changed over and started working with plants unexpectedly, because I never thought I would. And then my work with plants has become very much a work that I define as a collaboration. So it is science, it is experimental science, and it meets and respects all of the criteria that we owe to science. It just doesn't have some of the murderous characteristics, and also it is literally co-created with these other, in this case, is plants. And some of the experimental work that I've done in the recent years has been not just inspired, but I would say instructed by these others. And I was trying to do it just by myself. And it was very clear that my own inspiration and creativity, it's limited. I can collaborate and come up with things that are much better and much more creative, which in a bigger context, of course, extrapolates to like, well, if we do this at a global scale, then all of the problems that we think we have will be not there, because the solutions are right here. It's just that we are not listening to all the others who have those solutions. So
yeah, that's a wonderful notion of collaborating through listening. What is it that the fish was saying to you?
Well, you see, in my experiment, I spent almost, I think, 3 or 4 months in the water every day. These are wild animals, so they're not, used to be seen and touched and looked by humans all the time. And for my experiment, I was visiting the same fish every day. And after about a week, this fish started approaching me. I was like, oh, she's here again. She comes every day. And literally started developing a relationship where, at the individual level, where I knew that, being a good scientist, you number your subjects, or I would say in the old way, objects of study. And so I, of course, number the subject of my study. And so I would be like, oh, number 14 is a bit, shy. And while number 32, she's very, friendly, and she comes and, comes closer, she's fearless. So each one of them became a very specific and particular individual. Then the problem became when, after 3 or 4 months of this, and I could extend my hands in the water and these fish will come in my hand. I could curl my hands around them, and they didn't care, because they knew, oh, this is Monica, she comes every day and she's fine, she doesn't do anything, she just comes and visit. And in a way, it's almost like she's just coming to have a chat. And but on the last day of the experiment, and this was a requirement for my science, and much of science is based on this requirement. Observing and interacting in this way is not considered enough. And so you need to collect the animal and pull it apart and take the organs and measure some physiological something or other, so that you can validate or corroborate what you're seeing behaviorally. And of course, I've done a lot of that. And that day, I went in the water in the morning, and I decided that I was going to do one last swim to say goodbye, because after so long, I did have a relationship with all of these animals, and I decided that in the afternoon of that day, I would go back and collect them all, so that I could take my samples and do the science, blah blah. And but what happened actually, that morning when I went in, although I didn't have any nets or anything, all I had was me and my thought in my head of, I'm going to come and say goodbye, because this afternoon I'm going to come and get you all. And that day, nobody came out.
Oh, wow.
Nobody came out. And not only that, but in the afternoon, I had to fight to get them, and the dread that I felt went very deep, because not only these fish were showing me you're betraying our relationship. And we know that. You're not what you think you are. You're not what you've been for all the past 3-4 months. And not only that, but you're betraying yourself because you think you know what you're doing, but you don't. And we're telling you, this is what you're doing. You're killing, you have no rights. You're taking and you have no rights. And you don't even know that. And so, you know, when we are frozen with guilt, and we have seen this in the climate crisis and with COVID as well, anytime that there is a big crisis, the first reaction I think that most of us have is freeze. Don't know what to do, freeze. And in that space, there is little that you can do because you are frozen. And so I experienced that. And during that time, I think we tend to do, or what I did, was you just go and do what you know. You repeat the past. And so I went and collected them anyway, and I went and pulled them apart anyway, and I did get my samples of whatever organs, and I did get the data, and I did get the paper published. What a success. But exactly, I never did it again. I just could not take myself to do that again. And that's how I entered a real ethical crisis, personal and professional, because I realized, thanks to this fish, because that's what they taught me, is like, you have no idea who you are. You don't know what you're doing. And we're showing you. And now deal with it. And the way in which I dealt with it was, having to change my life, personally and also professionally. And that's when the plant came to my life and basically suggesting, well, you can work with us. You don't need to kill us. We are happy to offer a leaf here and there if you need a sample, but we can do something different. And so again, you spoke of embodiment. I think that was for me very much a question of embodiment.
Yeah, thank you, Monica. There's a lot of information and there's a lot of depth to what you're saying. I'm wondering, Dalisa, can you respond to that notion of embodiment and collaboration and listening? When you think about coexistence, are those common themes for you, or how would you extend that definition of coexistence professionally, because you're coming as an artist and many things, of course, as we all are. But in terms of, our professional work, we have the scientist and the artist. And, are they very different? That's a good question. But Dalisa, would you like to explain your understanding of coexistence, particularly in response to what Monica has been sharing?
Yeah, well, firstly, as Monica did, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the land on which I am calling in and joining you from, which is the Larrakia people, and my own elders from Yawuru and Bardi areas further north up, lower north as part of the Dampier Peninsula, forgetting where I am. And also I'd like to acknowledge the First Peoples of all the places that everyone is joining from today. Just respectfully do that to be able to share with you today. I guess even to speak as a professional artist, as a dancer and choreographer and a co-artistic director of a company that is working interculturally, but really coming from our Indigenous knowledge systems and perspectives. I guess first and foremost, I need to speak as an Aboriginal person, and I guess coexistence, to extend from what Monica's saying, a lot of what you learnt from those fish are instilled in Aboriginal people's culture. Our understandings and our relationships with other species and our existence in relationship to everything else, plant, animal, dirt, spirit world, sentient beings, everything is the fabric of our culture. And over thousands of years, those knowledge systems have been passed on and have been instilled within our being. So those understandings and those observations over many years have taught us the same kinds of things, as you can imagine, and have evolved into our culture. and what is our beliefs. And for us, they're connected to Bugarigara, which is the creation time, and those old stories that seem to continue to teach us every day in this modern, ever-changing world. And Aboriginal people, First Nations people are very good at shape-shifting and coexisting with the times. And I think our knowledge of behavioral movements of animals, life cycles, plants and animals according to seasons, all of that help us to, as an artist, then respond to the kinds of improvisational task-based work that we do in laboratories, where we offer exchange across trans-Indigenous experiences, and to share with one another how we process these things, how we embody our knowledge, how we express our concerns of the day, how we aim to teach or aim to share that rich knowledge in a physical way, in a theatrical way, in a creative way, that sometimes actually may be more effective than a lecture or a more academic kind of overview of a particular subject. So sometimes the power of, I guess, embodying and becoming animal and becoming tree and becoming the essence of life in movement can move people and teach people in a different way. So I guess, for me as a professional artist, creating space and creating platforms and experiences for others to kind of explore those with us as a company, Marrugeku, we that's kind of our core business, to create those spaces and those experiences, so that others can help us, unpick all those complexities.
You speak as though you're emerging from the ground through the air, spiraling back round again and colliding with the sun. And I don't think everybody does that. And I guess my next question really speaks to, how do creatives like yourself, both of you, because you're both intuitively and thoughtfully creative, and I know, Monica, maybe scientists aren't always defined in that way, but I also know that there's more to your practice as an artist, as a, an investigator, as someone who is making, both of you. Is there a way that creatives can enable coexistence with all species, animals, land, the environment, our histories? Is there something that creative people, whether they're artists or musicians or thinkers or philosophers, that they can do beyond that small scope? Because you both are speaking with incredible knowledge, but we don't all have that. So what is it that creatives could do to enable coexistence, just practically even, or even if it's not practical, what are there strategies or approaches that you would encourage or suggest, maybe? Either of you can answer that.
Well, just because I'm unmuted.
Go.
We in these experiences that we try to create for artists to come within our laboratories, and we often practice that listening to country, that putting people in place, being in a river gorge, at the base of a million-year-old reef, or learning about the historic stories of that place, but also the creation stories of the custodians of that country. And then, really giving the task to the artist to dive into that. And sometimes it's overwhelming because, as you say, not everyone has that knowledge, or not everyone comes from the same level of knowledge. So the way we explore that can be amazingly surprising, because people will respond in different ways. So we definitely encourage acknowledgement of place, where we are, what's under the dance floor, what's under the target, what's under the building, what's under the ground, but also what else is playing playing in that space from Spirit World for a lot of fellow Indigenous artists who are sharing the space, or your old people you bring with you, or all these things matter. And I think the freedom of an artist is to imagine these things and to have the freedom to go places where others may not, and then kind of embody that to reveal potential. So just encouraging acknowledgement of place and of process and how you create those connections and those heightened senses that you need to have to be able to create the opportunity to imagine. Monica?
Yeah, Monica.
Thank you. So beautiful to listen. And I guess, yeah, that is for me, I guess the key, so beautiful to listen. And I think most people are just not taking the time. It's not, again, I like to, and I'm a bit obsessed with this, so maybe I'm overemphasizing, but language and the way in which we speak, the way in which we tell the story of what we are, who we are, how we are in space and time, it's everything. It's like we literally create whatever story we want at any one time, and then we believe it, and therefore we act as if that is our reality. So we might as well have to create a better story than we are doing, because the one that we have created so far is not, I'm not judging it, but it can be a better, there are so many possibilities. Why are we doing this one? Why can we not choose the one that is a much happier and joyful one? And it's possible because some people are living in that world. And it reminds me of work from other Escobar or Viveiro de Castro, who are thinkers from the South American area. And what they're suggesting is these pluriverse, but they don't mean it like, oh, there are multiple universes, you know, living in the same place. No, they're saying that each one of us is bringing a different universe into life. So we are always colliding with all these universes, but which makes the story even better. You know, it makes it even more creative. The possibilities of intersection are infinite. So in this amazing complexity, to reduce the world into one boring story, it seems like not very creative at all, and it seems actually a missed opportunity, really. And so, of course, I'm always very envious of all the artists, official artists, because they do have the freedom of using the storytelling and the words and the language in freer way that we can. But I guess for me personally, the challenge then through my work has been to disentangle and free my own language as a scientist, because I guess science in our society, in our culture, modern culture, has still a voice that is quite important. And although I have to say in more recent time, that voice has been ignored too. So who cares? And we carry on doing the political things that we want to do. So, but if we are to give science the voice that we have, you know, the importance that we have given it to, then that voice can tell a different story. And I think it's important that it's used to tell this different story. And it doesn't mean that it has to be fanciful or make up stories that don't exist, or although I think all stories exist, but it can stick to its own practice of looking at data, looking at the facts. That's another approach to observing nature and our own nature in nature and with nature. But it can use a different language. Even the fact that you're saying, how we formulate questions, like you said, how would you, I'm paraphrasing, but how would you describe, how would you bring people to coexistence? You can't bring anyone to coexistence. They need to realize they already are the coexistence that they are looking for. And so even in the language, we are already dividing as if coexistence lives somewhere and you can take people there and then they will be in coexistence. And he says like, no, you are it's your intrinsic nature to be entangled and interwoven into this tapestry. Then whether you are acknowledging that or not, it's a different problem. And I guess that's what Dalisa perfectly emphasizes, like acknowledging where you are and taking those times to actually like, oh, okay, my feet are touching this ground, and this ground is, what is this ground? And what's underneath? And what is it that I'm breathing here? And who is giving me this oxygen? And what is this noise? And just stop, listen. And this, I mean, some people often think that this is a practice that can only be done in idyllic places, you know, you have to be near the waterfall, or you have to be in this pristine forest. Well, first of all, there was a report that came out just a couple of days ago, and I think something like not even 3% of the entire forest in the world are intact habitats. So they're not, these 3% pristine. So can you imagine if to find our coexistence, we all had to go to these 3% of the forest left that is intact? It makes no sense. And, but what it makes sense is to realize that you are in place no matter what. You live somewhere, right? You are somewhere, you're not out of space or time. So if you are in place, you start from there. And it doesn't matter if it's an apartment. You surely, in your apartment, surely you have possibly at least one plant that is sitting on your, you know, windowsill. Or even if you don't have that, you eat, right? You eat every day. What about that other that is coming into your life and makes your body every day? And even if you were fasting and you are not, you know, suspended out of space, the building, even if you are on the 34th floor, is still sitting on something. And that something is alive, and it's the one that need to be acknowledged. And so I think that it's a practice, again, of awareness. And if we look at all the poets and creative that we have had over the centuries, the most incredible natural poets have all taken time to just listen and just being really present with the space that they're in. And so again, it goes back to embodiment and space. And I, as I said, I'm jealous of the artists, and now especially of the dancers, because that's, you know, the body becomes such a beautiful tool, an instrument to deliver that feeling. And we are feeling creatures, so that's why we cry when we see things that touch us, because it's the only way that the body can express some things that even language then becomes redundant.
Do you have some advice or suggestions on how to listen to animals? So you've talked a lot about place and nature and being in space and being a part of space. Do you think that, and I do think that not everyone functions in that way. I don't know why, but because for me, it's also, you know, I grew up as a dancer, and I grew up in responsive to place and space and other people and the environment and animals and different kinds of species. And again, the listening, I agree, is a really great starting place. Is there something that you can speak to about the way that we listen to animals in that space? And do they have something different to say or teach us than landscape and environments like the ocean or the dirt or the desert? Do you think that there is something that they can invite you to listen to, and how do you see that happening?
Well, for me, the invitation happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like but the invitation is always open. And again, it's a matter of awareness, and the awareness can be nurtured and developed. And especially these days, I don't know how many times I've seen people that, you know, I would have never said they would get into some meditative practice, or, you know, some, cultivating awareness. And the only reason why we had to cultivate it is because we uncultivated it, and we cultivated other things. But again, I don't think, you keep saying, I don't think everybody feels this way. And I must agree with you, but also not in a way that not everyone can do this. I think this is intrinsic to our being human. And then it's just a matter of remembering how to be that. And we're just being confused because there is so much distraction and destruction, both for the mind and the planet. But I think that, you know, anybody who has a pet, if you have a dog, don't tell me, I don't believe that any dog owner would be able to say, my dog does not speak. Just
no, I have a dog.
doesn't have to come, exactly, speech doesn't have to come necessarily as the same language that we use. And we also speak in many other ways that is not language. We speak with our body for sure. And so if you have a dog, or if you have a cat, or if you even have a fish in a bowl, in a glass bowl, well, if you know that you can create those relationships with those animals that are close to you, the reason why you know that is because you spend time with, and you pay attention, and you care, and these are not trivial elements. A plant in your windowsill will die if you don't take care of it.
Yeah.
And it's the same. It's just that you have to expand your circle of care and just realize that everything is taking care of you, because so that you don't die. And so you can just take care of everything as well. And I'm not saying anything new. Actually, I'm kind of plagiarizing what Indigenous people here in Australia and everywhere keep telling us and reminding us. So take whatever practice you like. If you go for a run, a lot of runners, for example, is that feeling of like after a while you run, there is this feeling of being part of something bigger. When you're swimming, if you swim for long enough, there is this feeling of, and you know, it's called the athlete's high. And it is a high because suddenly you are connecting. So do whatever practice you need, do whatever it is that you need to do, but find that feeling, because not only it nurtures you, but it makes the entire planet a better place. Because certain practices that we do out of not being aware, we would not do them anymore. And I experienced that in my own life. And it's not a judgment, there is no need for feeling guilty. It's just like, okay, you were deep asleep for a little while. Now it's time to wake up.
Yeah. Can I throw that to Dalisa? Do you want to bounce off those comments?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I forgot to correct my actual name. It's a weird one because it's spelt with an S in there, but when pronounced, it's just Dalia, and I keep forgetting to kind of put that in my renaming of because I obviously know it as Dalia. So
yeah.
But
well, thank you, Dalia, and our apologies for mispronouncing it.
No worries.
Yeah.
But to bounce off Monica.
Yeah.
Yes,
do you think?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned before, you know, the interconnectedness and relationships with animals are just part of culture. That knowledge needs to be there, and you know, in some cases it's not there because of past policies that have kind of interrupted those knowledge transfers to the next generation. So in my community back home, we're very much trying to create that transfer of knowledge as quickly as possible, working with scientists and making sure that country will be taken care of, because basically born into Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture, you're born with responsibility to keep a balance. And so I think from the moment you're created, for us, we are born with that responsibility. So we're taught to continue that balance of life and balance of nurturing particular relationships, not just with your community, but with the animals and with the land and with special sacred places, and all of that. You know, as you progress through your adulthood, you're given the next stage of what you're meant to be focused on. And so I think our schooling, if you like, or our education, cultural education, embeds that from the moment you're born. And the way that your community connects you with those things from that early age, you develop this, what we call lian. Your spirit is, you're born with a spirit, of course, but you need to feed it, and you need to feed it in ways like people do when they need a break and go for a run and be in another environment or something that's disconnected from what they might call work. For us, in Indigenous terms, part of your job or part of your responsibilities is to continue that connection all the time when you need it. And I think this is the space that you find some of the more devastating issues that go on for our people these days. Well, for a long, since colonization, dealing with addiction and things like this, and that disconnect from family, disconnect from country, disconnect from culture and animals, and familiarity of who you are and where you come from. So all of that obviously lives within this lian, the spirit that we are. And I guess I had another thing that inspired me from what Monica said that I've just gone blank on, but I guess the observations of animals and how they behave in certain situations artistically have really enriched the process I use for choreographic purposes. I, for instance, will relate some of the concerns I have for community with young people kind of adopting foreign cultures rather than immersing themselves in the culture that's right there at their fingertips, and watching things like seagull move and how they behave and go towards something that's temptation, but back away with fear because they've been coexisting with humans for a little while now, so they behave in certain ways around in certain situations. So observing them, sitting there watching them over years, and then bringing that into a human form, or their sort of human character that they might become, and dancing that and finding the choreographic grammar that you could tease out from what you know about a seagull and its behavior, and then from things like that, looking at more kind of contemporary issues and contemporary dance, but then taking it back to old things that are just there for us, that are there to teach us. I had a conversation with one of my mimi, my grandfather. He's Patrick Dodson. He's also a minister, and for me, a philosopher, and teaches that at the local uni. But he inspired me to make a piece. I had a talk with him, and it was my first solo piece over for my career, and I wanted to look at the devastating issues of suicide in my community and how the rates are at the highest where I come from, as well as this identity crisis that young people seem to find themselves in because of those past policies that have disabled those knowledge transfers. And he pointed out to go and watch the gurer bird, which is a little wader bird, Kauai bird, and it calls to tell you when the tide is about to turn. And it does that and has done that for thousands of years to tell Aboriginal people in my area to move to higher ground because the tide is about to turn, and you move because you don't want to drown. And so metaphorically, I started to think in my community, how is the tide about to turn? Yeah. And we're facing massive industrialization and fracking and all kinds of things on some of those pristine environments that have the biodiversity that exists in those places. It's just, you can't imagine why anyone would want to do that when there is such rich life, and not just human life. It might look like a desert, but it has so many things that are coexisting with one another and have done for so long. So, all of these pressures and the loss of language and the way that we see the world through language and that knowledge, and how do we hold on to it as long as we possibly can. And so these waves, or these tides that are about to turn for our people, that are continually crashing on the shores, made me look at that bird and listen to that bird and think about what it is trying to teach us as a people, and how to, you know, decolonize our minds and how we do things and how we explore things. So it always comes back to nature for me, and it always comes back to, funnily enough, country and animals and your knowledge of people, and how important that to continue those connections, strong connections to all of those things. You can't exist without one, if you know what I mean.
Yes, yeah. Woven through everything you're saying is story, and you know, the stories of whether it's the fish or the bird or the you know, the way the land is shifting. There are stories and images and metaphors that you're referencing, and you know, I would suggest that the world over, stories shape our identity and shape culture, and what we tell, what stories we tell, become really important. I'm wondering if you can speak to how those stories of the past have shaped the future, and what is it that we need to learn from the stories of the past. I'm not talking about recorded history, which, as you say, would be a very particular kind of record, but those stories from your experience and perspective, how do they feed into shaping the future, and what stories do we need to be telling now? So if you were that bird and you're heralding a change in the tide, what is it that you're heralding?
I guess
let's go to you. Yeah,
I guess one of the key elements of the production, because it's an hour on a stage with yourself, it's a bit of a healing process in terms of the journey as the sole performer on stage. I also have a net that hangs in the space that I use to climb, to swing, to you know, be free in, but also be entangled in. Through dance has a power to connect the past and the present. And for us, Bulgarigara, that place that I was talking about, which is not a place over there, but the creation time, a time that actually is not from way back. It exists today and will always, because those spirit beings are still here for us, carry through. That is with us. So I think the thing that shone through in that I wanted to be strong in the piece was to shine through the resilience and strength of that knowledge and that bird, and that's the survival. That's why we're still here. That's why we're still able to share what we have now. That that resilience and strength is something to be celebrated. That's something to be shared and empower our own people, but also to, you know, work with scientists, work with other people in the world to make, like we're talking about, this place function better and don't repeat the past, because for us there's lots of, you know, avoiding not repeating what happened before, and so I don't really aim to kind of retell old stories, but I try to bring those old stories within my body and my knowledge to then make the new song or dance or thing that has to carry that knowledge through to the next generation, so that it has the power to be able to, you know, go to the core or the heart or the lian, the spirit of someone who's watching, to be able to carry that knowledge with themselves and how they relate to that subject matter or that experience, so that they can carry it with them into whichever track they're on. Yeah, I guess I don't know if that answered the question now, but
yeah, it's a great response, because you went straight to speaking as a dancer, and the fact that dance is that's the language with which you're communicating, and it's not spoken word, it's the whole body, which is the mind, the soul, the spirit. And so you're weaving past and present and communicating something, but it's not coercive, because it's an invitation for an audience member or another collaborating artist to join you in the dance, which is, I think, really insightful. But also interesting that you spoke to your professional practice as well as your cultural heritage. I'm wondering, Monica, whether you too would respond as a scientist and speak to how would you capture or, you know, from your perspective, what is required for change moving forward for all of us to live well together, for all of us to learn to listen and be responsive. So Dalia is talking about the, you know, the way that we dance and the power of that, because it's, you know, the performing arts are incredibly powerful to open a space and rupture stereotypes and invite a change in perspectives, which I do believe enables us to, you know, consider coexistence and be responsive to the invitation to live well together. How about you, Monica? How, from your perspective, professionally and personally, how would you respond to the way we can move forward, accounting for the stories of the past, but what stories do we need to tell for the future?
Yeah, well, Dalia gave me so much that it's like, oh yeah, and that while you were talking, and now I don't know what I'm gonna do, but we'll see what comes out. Well, one thing that definitely caught my attention, because I'm acutely aware of it within the context of my own practice as a scientist. And you spoke of, you know, you get on the stage, it's an hour long and you're on your own on this stage, and it's a healing process. And these stories are also there to heal this past by not repeating the past. And I guess, you know, being of European descendants and, well, born and descending from that past, I am acutely aware of the fact that we as Europeans have exported our wounding. So Europe has lived through centuries and century upon centuries of hurting one another, you know, oh, this country over there, this country over there. And this wounding has been going on and never been healed. It's just been repeated over and over again. So the story was being told over and over again. And when there was no more space to tell it in the place where we were, we just exported it everywhere where we went. Colonizing really is exactly what we exported. We exported our own pain that we never wanted to look at, and we're still doing that right now. So I think that I'm in such a space of honoring and really, yeah, much respect for the Aboriginal people of Australia, but also everywhere in the world, where through various practices, and the arts are so potent in this, have been looking at that pain and not let it fester for centuries and centuries and centuries. It's like, okay, we've been through this disaster and now we're gonna heal it and move forward. And I think for the world in general, unless the European stock, which has been spreading the pain everywhere where it's been, decide to mature enough to grow up and look at its own pain and heal it, it's really difficult to write a different story, because the temptation is to tell the same story over and over again, which is what we are still doing. That's why we would go to an intact, beautiful place with lots of life, and we will just destroy everything, because this is what has been experienced over and over, and we are not realizing, again, it's a matter of awareness, we're not realizing that we're actually doing the past again. And now, there was one thing that I wanted to read out of the paper that I was mentioning before, because I think that is also very pertinent. It's only 2.8% of the Earth land surface that contains ecologically intact communities. And I'm reading, many of the areas identified as ecologically intact coincide with territories managed by Indigenous communities who have played a vital role in maintaining the ecological integrity of these areas. I think that, as a piece of science, as a piece of data, speaks a lot, because it's just saying there are ways to do this, and there are also ways not to do this. And science, I think, can be the one voice that can highlight some of these positive practice. And positive, I mean, things that nurture life, they allow for this system to thrive rather than destruction. And also, I think science in itself is sitting at that tidal place. And I think the little bird has been coming to tweet around science as well. There is a lot of change in science too, and more, you know, for a long time, I thought I felt very isolated and alone in my own way of thinking. And then as I started sharing, I realized actually there are a lot of colleagues in the same situation. They're just not being outspoken about it. But as soon as you share your truth and your experience and they share theirs, you realize, oh, it's two of us. Oh, there is a group of us. Oh, there is actually a lot of us who are not happy about how science is being, it has turned into this instrument of, you know, again, a colonialist approach. And, but science per se is just an exploration. Science per se is just a space of wonder and curiosity, which is, I guess, is the same space that an artist goes in or a musician goes in. You're listening, you're watching, and then something creative comes up and you express it. And so science, in a way, is probably the most, the saddest of the victim of colonialism, because it has turned into this thing that is not really the spirit of science. Nobody starts science because he wants to destroy an environment. If you talk to the students, they start science, especially biological sciences, because they love the animals, they love the plants, they love nature. And then that thing gets taken away and it becomes something else. So I am in the process, in my own practice, I am in the process with another a group of beautiful people, all scientists. We are in the process of bringing back the spirit, I guess, to science. And that is, it is the subjective, the experiential part of us. Again, like all the other practices, science doesn't get made out of nowhere. The ideas don't just arrive out of nowhere and then they're packaged and you just go in a lab and do those. Ideas are coming from our own spirit and our own creative power. And there is a lot of imagination that is required for those ideas to be birthed out into the world. So this part of science is always, you know, never spoken of. You never see papers by scientists written about like, oh, before I did this experiment, this is what I thought, and then I did this experiment. That part is taken out. And this ideal of objectification, objectifying the objective viewer is actually problematic, because it doesn't produce good science. It produces a science that is telling a particular story, not actually what's happening. And so I think by bringing back the spirit of the human that is involved in the science, and by bringing back the power of the subjective experience into this science, you know, science right now, many colleagues I'm sure hearing this would freak out and say like, well, that's not good science. If you're being subjective, that's not good science. But what I'm arguing, and I'm not the only one, is that actually being subjective is just acknowledging an aspect of science that is present anyway, but you're ignoring it. So you're actually not doing good science by ignoring it, because you're ignoring important data that could inform why you're seeing things in a particular way, because we all have cognitive biases and we all have cultural biases, and those biases will play. But if you pretend that they're not there, then you won't even see the power that they have on describing what you're trying to describe. While if you're acknowledging them and engaging actively, it's like, oh, I see, this is how I see things, but actually other people see them differently. Then blending, you know, science with bodies of knowledge that come from other spaces, including, you know, indigenous science, you know, it would empower a science that is more pluralistic, instead of being a particular science, which is the one that we think is the only science. I think that is a very reducted version of science. And in fact, is a reductionist approach. And what we are calling for is a pluralistic approach, where different bodies of knowledge, which we are currently perceiving as separate, we bring them together so that they coexist. And they coexist to create what we then might call still science, or maybe we give it another name, I don't know, who knows. But it will be a science that allows for all of these multiple voices to speak, because there are different aspects of what we are trying to describe. So why shouldn't they be all included? If we are being scientists and we are being rigorously adapting and using the scientific method, then we need to account for all the possibilities, or as many possibilities as we're capable of. And so in a way, science is experiencing the same high tide coming in. I'm really hoping that this is going to happen sooner rather than later. We're working on it. And in that sense, that's why I'm no longer really afraid to openly engage with these other areas and bodies of knowledge, because what I find in my experience is that to do an experiment in science is actually the easiest thing for a scientist. That's not the issue. The issue is the thinking that goes behind that experiment, and how deep that thinking is, how all embracing that thinking is, the more impact that science will have in the wider space. Otherwise, it's going to be a little detail that nobody cares about. And much of science, unfortunately, is about little details that nobody cares about. So many papers are published every day about nothing. So how do we make less, but more poignant, more powerful, more needed? And that will be the story that we can tell, or one of the many stories.
Yes. There are so many things that have been raised in the past hour. I'm aware that we have an audience online, and there may be a question from somebody who would like to unmute or their video. Just checking the chat. We have time for a question. There's quite a few little comments here that people are writing. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question of either Dalia or Monica, or both of them? And no, is that something that you would like to facilitate, or?
As I wait for people to unmute, we have 4 minutes left, so it's quite short. It was really intense, and thank you both, Dalia and Monica, amazing talk. And there was some interesting discussion also going online. I don't know if we have the time really to answer to this, but this very interesting big picture narrative and how to shift it and how to go back and to go to the future brings me to a question that will remain with us, I suppose. But really, as a dancer, how in your body this desire of coexistence? I'm not a dancer, but I always imagine as Monica uses her words in such a, incredible way. You're really a beautiful speaker, Monica. I'm imagining Dalia sitting down and wanted to dance. I don't know. I'm not a dancer. I cannot express that. But I think that's also the bringing together the different perspective is how we can express ourselves, I guess. And then for Monica would be very interesting at the microorganism level of the science, really a tangible example. I understand that the easy is to be in the lab, right? But I still have this curiosity of learning more about how at the micro level, this coexistence can teach us something. As science today is a genetic science, is the invisible to the human eye, right? So these two questions, I don't know if we have 1 minute each to quickly answer, or if there are other comments.
Just to respond, of course, I feel a lot more comfortable to move my responses than to try to articulate them with in English and in this kind of platform where I feel a bit like a fish out of water because I'm not a scientist, but I more effectively probably express myself through movement, and dance theatre can include language and can include text. So we use those mediums to help us express what we have within our body. But I draw from everything that makes my being what it is. So as well as all the other artists that I've been privileged to work with. So we, just listening to Monica in that last response was amazing, because she almost talked about the process that I feel we do in a physical way, where we bring people with different perspectives purposefully into a space, into a specific place to explore and to research and to make a project of finding what the experiment is, you know, like putting our minds together from the angles that we're coming from to come up with the very new way to look at something in a physical way.
Dalia, I didn't mean by any means to say that you cannot, you don't express yourself beautifully.
Oh, no, I didn't take that.
One more tool in your toolbox, that is the body, that I admire in performing artists, was totally that, was not anything.
I didn't take it in that way, but yeah, if you'd like to see more of that body moving, by all means, check our company's website out.
Monica, did you want to comment very quickly? Just in
well, the comment, the short answer would be like, genetics is just a small branch of science, and the fact that we are giving it so much weight in our, you know, that's what you mentioned straight away. Our genetics is like genetics, and so what? You know, so what? Everything around us is speaking, and we are engaging with everything around us, and we are so. And it's true, so much work is being funded to do the invisible, when the visible that is obviously right in front of our eyes, we seem to discard and not wanting to see. So I'm not a geneticist. I refuse to do any genetics in my work. All my work has been always ecologically based, which means I'm interested in relationship between, with, through, across. So that's one point. The other point that I'd like to share is because it connects really well, at least is my experience of the closest that I could see and express in terms of connecting with the dance. I was invited many years ago, I was invited to respond to a symposium in a conference. And I never knew what a respondent was, because we don't do that in science. It's a thing that the humanities do. But I thought, like, oh, how exciting. Yes, I'll come and I'll do that, and without having a clue what I was going to be doing. And so off I go, and I'm trying to prepare my response, and I've got something like 50 slides, and it's just ridiculous. And I'm, you know, 2 days before I'm supposed to go, I still don't know what it is that I'm supposed to be doing, and very confused. At the time, I was dancing a lot, the 5 rhythms, and I was reading a book, which was written on the 5 rhythms. And I remember the day before the conference, as I was reading this book, one of the lines in the book said, like, the ego react, the soul respond. And that in itself, just like, I'm just reacting. They're asking me to respond. And instead I'm reacting, I'm trying, my mind is trying to work something out, and I go 50 slides that make no sense. And instead I need to respond. And so I need to use my soul. I need to let my soul do the job. So what happened was that in my head was like, you need to delete all the slides. And I was like, what? I can't go to a conference and not have slides, you know? So I deleted all the slides except 5 of them, which just were left behind, and they were just there. And all of the slides, the 5 slides that I had left, were all, you know, beautiful, like a beautiful flower, the earth from space, a wave, beautiful images with no words. So I did this experiment, and I went, it was my time to do the response. And I just told the story of what happened that I just told you. And then I showed the slide, and as I saw, let's see what comes out. And so as I moved through the slide, I started expressing whatever was coming out in response to what I read from this other person. What was interesting, it wasn't so much what I said, because I don't even know what I said, but what it was interesting that 3 different people, independently of each other, approached me later, and they said, do you know anything about the 5 rhythms? I said, yeah, I dance it every week. And it was like, because, you know, as you move through your 5 slides, I saw you dancing through the space. And each slide was one of those movements, and even the rhythm in which you spoke, and it was just as if you were dancing your presentation. So I'm sharing this because I think that, again, everything is interconnected and coexisting. And so although I'm not a professional dancer, obviously, I think that all of us have the dancer inside, all of us have the scientist inside, all of us have all of these aspects. And again, it's just a matter of engaging with them and expressing them. And they can come through in a serious conference with academics or on a stage in a beautiful theater. And there is no difference. I think that is the important thing, that if we keep separating things in different containers and different compartments, we are reiterating the same problem. Instead, coexistence is about bringing them all, realizing that they are all in the same time space, and they were always here and they will always be here. And as Dalia was mentioning before, it's like the spirits of things for me, it's outside time and space, and yet it manifests and it embodies time and space. So it's all about becoming aware of that.
Thank you, Monica. I think you've just woven together the ending for our session by bringing it back to a really solid place of coexistence through listening and responding, which you both have done with incredible sensitivity and wisdom, and the sharing of your knowledge is incredibly valued. And I thank you both for your time and for your willingness to share your thoughts, not just your very great intellectual thoughts, but the wisdom of your bodies as well. So thank you so much. For those of you who would like, did want to ask questions or have some questions, you can contact both Dalia and Monica via their websites, if that's okay, ladies. Yes, so head to their website, Google their names, and it will come up, and you can always post a comment or a question there. And I think I will throw this back to the very wonderful hosts at Nature Art Habitat for this webinar. And thank you all so much for participating and listening. And I hope that as you head into your evening or you head into your day, as some of us are, that it will be sunlit and sprinkled with starlight, and that you will begin to listen deeply with every cell of your body, but also your spirit. And I thank you. Arrivederci.
Thank you, everybody. We are closing actually.
Thank you.
With Monica.
Nice to meet you, Dalia.
You too, Monica. Beautiful to speak with.
Thank you, Dalia, Monica, Lucinda, for this last hour of our 8-hour marathon. We managed with this time after 1 year, 2020, to do 1 hour program, to do an 8 hours program. So to link Europe, California in a way, the United States, but going kind of all the way to the West, and then reaching Australia. So that was really a kind of a desire to link all of us in one go. It was a long day for some of us, but I feel personally very thankful, first of all, for everyone that joined us and participated, from the moderators to the speaker and to the NAHR group. We are about 10 people, super dedicated. We are a small nonprofit organization that really does it with the soul and the passion of this topic. So it's beautiful to see this coming together. NAHR is participation, that's what we say, and it's an open dialogue to continue evolving our minds, our bodies. And I want to thank personally everybody, and on behalf of NAHR, some of us are asleep right now in Italy, and some of us are waking up in Australia. And so thank you again.